Highly requested video, how to make 300, 400, 500 wheel horsepower on your 08 Plus STI using one of these things, a Cobb access port. I'm not gonna be talking about ECU tech, ECU tech, standalone ECUs, because odds are, if you're like me, the average person, you're not gonna go out and spend thousands of dollars on a standalone ECU for a street driven car. Also, if you blow up your car, it's not my fault. It's your fault, so do it at your own risk. And lastly, let's talk about the differences in dyno measurements. You have three different dynos. You have a dyno pack, which is what I use, a dyno jet, and a Mustang dyno. Dyno packs are gonna be the most repeatable, accurate measurement, but they do read a bit higher. And a Mustang dyno is gonna be an inertial-based dyno that's going to read the lowest. And if you care about bragging online, then a dyno jet is for you because those read the highest. So now that we have those out of the way, let's get into talking about the parts. Now, before we jump into the fun stuff, unfortunately, we should talk about reliability mods, which I argue are more important than any other modification you can make. I recommend getting an IG air oil separator or a good set of catch cans like Radium. It just helps reduce the blow by in the intake track. Next up, and ask me how I know this, I highly recommend you guys picking up an IG oil pan, pickup, and baffle. I don't recommend getting the Killer B one just because those have been known to fail. A good extra bonus, which I have on my car, get a good radiator. I personally have a coil rad in my 2017 STI. I've had it for about 2 years, I have no issues. And if you have a bigger budget and want to ball out, I recommend getting CSF. They make really good products, but they are really expensive. Starting off with 300 wheel horsepower, you're gonna need one of these things, a Cobb access port. Odds are you already know what it does, but in case you don't, essentially it's a thing that plugs into the OBD2 port, gets live data, measures certain parameters, and is the gateway to allow your tuner to make certain changes for those parameters to have your car running a certain way. Intakes, everybody loves loud induction sounds. Get whatever one you want, Cobb, GreenSpeed, ETS. Just make sure to get one with a box. We don't want any hot air intakes. A box is going to help reduce and lower those intake air temperatures. It's just gonna make the car a lot happier overall. Next up, get a good 3-port boost control solenoid or an ECBS, electronic boost control solenoid. They're all made by the same manufacturer. Again, get whichever one you fancy, GreenSpeed, Cobb, etc. Now let's get into the controversial stuff. Downpipes. You can get a catted or a catless one. My 2017 STI has an NVIDIA 3-inch catless divorced downpipe. It sounds amazing, but you're gonna need to find a tuner, if those still exist, that does not care about emission related components being there on your car. Some tuners won't touch them, others will. Catted downpipes are available, I believe, still on the market. Maybe MAP, maybe Cobb's new one, I'm not too sure. Probably not, especially after that 3-letter agency emission scandal. But if you can find a catted downpipe with a good quality Gessie cat or Jessie cat, however you want to say it, those are going to be your best option, just because the thing with downpipes, you're gonna get a check engine light. I forget what it is. I think it's P0204. If you have a check engine light, that means you cannot use Sport Sharp, Sport, or Intelligent. You can't use any other drive modes. So your driver control center differential is not going to work, and other features like, I believe, cruise control, if you're lame and use that. Just kidding. I just personally don't use it, but just know that may be a risk that you run into if you decide to go with the downpipe route. But it's gonna be awesome, it sounds great, and it's definitely gonna be needed to make horsepower. Now, once you've added a downpipe, you're gonna find out you've maxed out the fuel system. So I recommend at this level, and yes, this level, to get ID 1050cc injectors. I just recommend doing so. You're gonna need them anyway once you jump up to 400 wheel horsepower. This is all done, I should have said, with the stock VF48 turbo on the 08 Plus STI. Get any catback exhaust you want, single exit, dual exit, doesn't matter. I recommend getting a good top mount intercooler, one that's within your budget, or if you're like myself, the first thing I did, especially on this car, once I realized the turbo sits right underneath the top mount intercooler, is just upgrade to a front mount. The car overall is going to feel a lot better. People say it's going to be laggier, which, to be honest with you guys, I hardly noticed a difference when finally converting. In fact, I think the car drove a lot better. And like I said, in my opinion, it's just the dumbest thing to do on an EJ considering the placement of the turbo. And last but not least, this one's a bit obvious, but just get a good solid tune. I really like dyno tuning my car. I don't really like the whole e-tuning process, having to send a log to a tuner, waiting for the revision and back and forth. I like to take my car up to the dyno, have the tuner do what they do, and make sure everything is all said and done, and make sure the car is running safely and optimally. 400 wheel horsepower. This is where things get fun and interesting. Everything that I previously just mentioned. Now, you can do this on your OEM short block, Type RA OEM short block, doesn't matter, but just know there is a risk of you blowing up the car, and that is going to be on you, not me. I recommend at this point going to a built motor, which means get a built short block from IG out front, or if you're feeling inclined, do it yourself. I did this on stock heads. You don't really need to do anything with heads of stock valves, springs, retainers, and cams at this point. I recommend upgrading the OEM low pressure fuel pump that sits in the back seat to an AEM 340 liter power fuel pump. Just drop in, it's really simple to install, and it's going to be really beneficial when trying to go for over 400 wheel horsepower. Flex fuel kits, this is where things get really fun. Ethanol really wakes up Subarus, WRX, STI, doesn't matter. It makes the car 10 times more fun to drive. You're gonna want a Cobb or I Build Race Cars IBR flex fuel kit, a next gen flex fuel kit to be specific. Now at this point, I recommend you guys replacing the stock fuel lines and rails. As far as rails go, you can get whatever color and brand you want, except I personally am running the Blue Torque Solutions fuel rails, and they're crappy, but not because they're blue. The machining process on them are not that good, so I recommend getting Cobb's fuel rails or IAGs. Now, as far as the fuel lines go, I believe IAG and Cobb both sell their line kits. They're gonna be essentially replacing all the feed and return lines that go to the firewall, that go all the way to the back of the car with -6 feed and return. And speaking of return, at this point, I really recommend getting a 3-port fuel pressure regulator. You can get a radium fuel pressure regulator or an aeromotive fuel pressure regulator. The cool thing about them is that you can manually set base fuel pressure. I personally have installed the radium 3-port fuel pressure regulator, and I really love the piece. It is really well machined, and it was a super easy install. Next up, you're gonna need to upgrade those injectors. We were running 1050 injectors on the previous setup, but if we're gonna be running flex fuel, you're gonna be wanting to upgrade to ID 1300 cc injectors, because at 1050 cc injectors on ethanol, because you're gonna flow more fuel, you're gonna be maxing out the injector duty cycle pretty early on when you start pushing that turbo. And speaking of turbos, at this point, I really recommend getting an FP Green or a BCP X500 Plus. They're really good turbo options. Also, I forgot to mention, once you upgrade the turbo, make sure to get a good aftermarket turbo inlet like Cobb, Perrin, Tomei, whatever you fancy. They're gonna be those 2.4-inch diameter turbo inlets. They're gonna be made out of silicone. They're a lot nicer than the crappy OEM one. At this point, I recommend replacing the OEM clutch with an ACT HDSS or an XTSS, which is what I personally run in my 2017 STI. Get the pressure plate and flywheel, but don't worry about any lightweight flywheels. Just stick to the OEM flywheel, get it resurfaced or get a brand new flywheel, and just get a fluid damper, crank pulley, or harmonic balancer. At this point, I do recommend you guys getting a good bypass valve like Cobb, or if you want that cool, sweet turbo sound from HKS or Tile Q with the 50mm blow-off valve, you can finally switch over to speed density, which is essentially just a better way to measure intake air temperatures. You can run a pure speed density setup or a hybrid setup, but I recommend just doing the pure speed density setup. It's gonna make tuning the car a lot easier when it comes down to it, and it lets you make those cool blow-off sounds. 500 wheel horsepower, this is what I'm making. This is where things get really spicy, but really fun. Everything I just previously mentioned, but at this point, I recommend swapping out that AEM 340 for a single Walbro 450, or this is where I was getting at, going to the radium fuel pump hanger to hold 2 AEM 340s. And once you do the radium setup, you're also going to need to hardwire those pumps. You can either do so by doing the DIY route, or you can just buy the iWire kit, which is what I did. I have a video on that on my channel if you want to check that out. It essentially retains the stock fuel pump controller that sits in the back of the trunk, meaning your pumps are not going to be operating at 100% duty cycle all the time. And in the event of an accident, fuel is not going to be continuously fed into the engine and other components while the car is obviously not moving anywhere, creating a fire hazard. Now, next up, turbos. You can still run the BCP X500 Plus. That will get you to around 520, 530 wheel horsepower, which is what I'm currently making. But at this point, I recommend going to the FP Black, which is what I would have done with a 10cm upgrade, or going for the BCP X500R. This is where you're going to need to run an externally gated up pipe, meaning you're going to have an external wastegate, which is typically a Tile 38mm wastegate. When you do that, you typically upgrade the headers. On my setup, I'm running an internally wastegated turbo, which is the BCP X500 Plus, and I'm still running the stock up pipe and the stock headers. I was originally planning on going the external wastegated route, but honestly, I already knew I was going to be going rotated, which is going to happen very soon because I already have all the parts sitting at home. So I didn't want to waste the money on the up pipe and the headers and that whole setup. And if you're upgrading to the FP Black, something I forgot to mention is you're going to need to upgrade to the Killer B 3-inch hard turbo inlet, which I've installed on the channel, or you can install the FP turbo inlet, which I've also heard is not fun. And you're gonna need to run 8mm or 10mm phenolic spacers just to help get more clearance from the TGVs, the intake manifold, and the spacing right next to it on the passenger side for that turbo inlet to run to the intake. Now, this next mod is something I recently did to my 2017 STI, and that is a Cobb 4-bar map sensor. If you're pushing more than 25 pounds of boost, I recommend doing this mod. It's going to give you more headroom as you start turning up the boost, and especially as you run into these bigger aftermarket stock location turbos that move more air, especially for us when we eventually go rotated. That's going to be a mod that I was going to have to do anyway. And that's going to be my part list on how to make 300, 400, 500 wheel horsepower on an 08 Plus STI using a Cobb access port. I've been documenting this STI ever since it grenaded itself on this channel about a year ago, almost at this point. And I have pretty much every single mod that I listed installed on my channel if you're interested in checking any of those out. This is just my opinion and my way to do this. There are a million ways to build these cars. Some argue there's only one way, some argue there's multiple different ways. But this is just from my experience and what I've documented on this channel so far. If you have a question on a specific part, make sure to leave it down below on the comment section. If you guys learned something new, make sure to leave the video a like, turn it whatever color it turns for you. If you guys like the content, I put content out every single week, different videos. Maybe I'll start putting out POVs, but I do post informative videos like this and eventually just try to help you guys out. Hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, I will catch you guys on the next one.